Welcome to The Debate. Here we delve into the complex, often challenging ideas explored in NeonKore Media's The Deep Dive. Our goal is always to offer, nuanced perspectives and engage in some truly in-depth discussion, drawing everything directly from the rich content of their episodes.
That's right. And today we're looking closely at insights from the Deep Dives episode at E20A, discussion about a true legend, icon, GOAT, named Tupac. It posed a really central question about Tupac Shakur. Was he ultimately a messiah or a menace?
Exactly. And that core tension is what we'll be unpacking today. So I'll be making the case for Tupac as, yes, deeply flawed, but fundamentally a revolutionary voice, a kind of mirror reflecting his generation's struggles and their aspirations, too.
Let's say the narratives he embodied often seem to lean towards perpetuating a cycle of conflict and perhaps even disillusionment. Again, all based on the material the Deep Dive laid out.
Okay, let's start then. Let's begin with Tupac Shakur's very foundation. His name itself, Tupac Amaru, meaning intelligent warrior after the Inca emperor who led this major rebellion. Well, that's a powerful statement of revolutionary purpose right from the start. He literally grew up surrounded by radical activism, deeply influenced by his mother, Afeni Shakur, and his godfather, Geronimo Pratt, both, prominent Black Panther figures.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just activism. His artistic side, his craft, was really honed at the Baltimore School for the Arts. He studied poetry, jazz, even ballet. So this wasn't just raw talent, it was learned discipline. It's what enabled his compelling storytelling and that dramatic delivery we know. And you see this sensitivity, this vulnerability in things like the poems he wrote for Jada Pinkett.
Right.
His early music, especially the album Tupacalypse Now, it was just unfiltered social commentary, directly taking on police brutality, racism, poverty. Take Brenda's Got a Baby. He turned a simple newspaper story into this devastating political statement. It really showcased rap's power for deep social critique, forcing people to confront these harsh realities. And then there's Thug Life.
Okay.
Often misunderstood, yes, but it was meant as this complex philosophy born from pain, the acronym itself. The hate you give little infants fuse everybody. This was intended as a code, for loyalty, for resilience, for the dispossessed. It was an earnest attempt, really, to offer an alternative to gang life through music and a shared identity. He genuinely seemed to believe he was doing God's work in the hood, serving his community, speaking for the voiceless, challenging those systemic failures like economic inequality. He even reframed the gun argument for Black men in his community, seeing it as self-defense in what he called a war zone, not just crime. He said he was holding up a mirror, basically, to the violence already there.
Well, I approach this from a slightly different perspective, pulling from the same source material, of course. While Tupac undeniably inherited that revolutionary legacy you mentioned, the Deep Dive also makes it clear how deeply he absorbed the disillusionment from seeing the Black Panthers targeted, fractured, and this seemed to complicate his vision, fostering a pretty profound skepticism about whether the old ways could actually work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Then his move to Marion City. It brought a different kind of mentorship from what he called street guys. They taught him a very different set of survival rules, and this created, I think, a real friction with his artistic background, ultimately fueling this raw confrontational image that, well, I would argue often overshadowed his more nuanced intentions. Now, about Thug Life.
Yeah.
Despite his explanations of the acronym, which were detailed, in public perception, it was just widely seen as glorifying gangsterism. The image, the aggressive sound, certain lyrics, Thug Life, as the source material noted, were undeniably confrontational. This duality, this pull in two directions, I believe, confused and alienated a lot of people. It blurred the lines between social critique and what looked like, frankly, a glorification of a dangerous lifestyle. And regretfully, his life became this magnet for conflict. You have the '93 Atlanta shooting, the '94 sex abuse conviction, which the judge called brutal violence, and then that devastating Times Square shooting. These events, rather than clarifying his mission, seemed to fuel deep paranoia and a pervasive sense of betrayal, pushing him further into a defensive, often aggressive stance.
Okay.
His post-prison alignment with Sojourner and death row, it offered a lifeline. but it also inextricably tied him to this intimidating gangster power vibe. It just intensified the war he already felt he was in. And while All Eyes on Me, sure, Disc 1 felt like a victory lap, Disc 2 had this really dark, fatalistic edge. It reflected what's been called his Dannemora trauma, the psychological impact of prison, his paranoia, and this sense that time was running out. It captured, as the deep dive put it so vividly, a kind of block party with grenades under the table atmosphere. And crucially, he personally escalated the East Coast-West Coast rivalry. He vowed to destroy Bad Boy. He created what can only be called pure venom diss tracks, like Hit 'Em Up. He actively fostered an atmosphere of intense mistrust, potential violence, summed up by his directive to trust nobody.
I understand why you focus on the public perception and, yes, the undeniable confrontational parts of thug life. But let's maybe dig a bit deeper into its core message, as explored in that episode from the deep dive. Tupac's intention for thug life seems far more profound than just glorification. He explicitly offered it as a survival philosophy for marginalized youth, a complex explanation for the cycle of neglect and violence. That acronym, the hate you give little infants fans everybody, wasn't just a slogan, it was direct commentary on the sociological impact of systemic problems. He wasn't advocating for thuggery itself, arguably, but trying to channel that raw street energy, that defiance, into something constructive. He even formed a group called Thug Life specifically to use music as an alternative path. It was his effort to provide a code, a framework for loyalty and resilience in a world that felt hostile. An attempt at transformation, maybe, using the language of the streets to speak to the streets, offering a path that acknowledged their pain but sought to elevate them beyond it. The disconnect, I'd argue, wasn't necessarily a failure of his intention, but maybe more a reflection of how incredibly difficult it is to reclaim a loaded term in mass culture, especially when the artist themselves embodies so much raw energy.
And I appreciate you emphasizing his stated intention and the difficulty of reclaiming terms. That's fair. But when we look at the practical impact, was it really perceived as this nuanced philosophical code by the wider audience? Or did its confrontational elements and that raw energy you just mentioned often just completely overshadow the complex message? While his intellectual explanation might have been there, the immediate public perception, certainly within broader media and even within parts of street culture itself, seemed to focus squarely on the more aggressive aesthetics, the image he projected, the music's sound, certain lyrics from those associated tracks. They created this powerful visual and auditory link to gangsterism. That Thug Life M catchphrase, for instance, wasn't processed by most people as a deep philosophical statement. It came across as an embrace of a defiant, often violent identity. And this, I would argue, blurred the lines significantly. It made it incredibly difficult for an audience to separate the social critique from what appeared, at least at times, to be a glorification of the very lifestyle he claimed he wanted to help people transcend. So this duality, whether fully intended or not, contributed to confusion and, frankly, fueled that menace narrative that followed him. It's a really fascinating example of how artistic intent can clash so dramatically with public reception, especially when the art's so raw and visceral.
That's a compelling point about controlling perception, and it does bring us to another critical layer, the context for his perceived escalation of conflict. The 1994 Times Square shooting that profoundly impacted him. It wasn't just an incident, it became this deeply traumatic conviction of betrayal. As the deep dive material highlights, he genuinely felt set up, possibly even by people within hip-hop, believing that because he represented the black community, no one would dare do this to him. That trauma, that feeling of being hunted, betrayed, it directly fueled his later music. Albums like All Eyes on Me, tracks like Hellraiser, Only Fear of Death, they vividly reflected this Dannemora trauma, his intense paranoia, and this palpable sense of living in a war zone. So his war zone mentality wasn't, perhaps, just an arbitrary choice to escalate, it was a genuine reflection of his lived experience and a visceral critique of a system he felt was rigged against him.
He saw himself as a truth teller, exposing the violence and betrayal he felt was endemic. It's hard to imagine anyone responding to that kind of trauma with complete calm, especially someone who saw himself fighting a bigger battle.
Well, I certainly acknowledge the profound trauma of the '94 shooting. It was undoubtedly horrific. But I would argue his response went beyond simply reflecting it. The source material we're discussing suggests he actively contributed to the escalation, vowing to destroy Bad Boy, releasing those pure venom diss tracks like Hit 'Em Up, publicly drawing lines in the sand. Think of Suge Knight at the Source Awards with Tupac right there beside him. These actions actively escalated the East Coast-West Coast rivalry into a situation that absolutely fostered real-world violence. Was this just a critique of a rigged system anymore, or did it become a deeply personal vendetta, one that drew others into a dangerous conflict far beyond abstract commentary? And furthermore, his criticism wasn't just limited to perceived music industry enemies. He even attacked figures like Jesse Jackson for criticizing rappers using really charged language about King's assassination. This kind of rhetoric, while maybe stemming from that deep mistrust and the Dannemora trauma, also contributed significantly to division, not unity. It really raises the question: at what point does responding to perceived injustice cross the line into actively fueling the very conflict you claim to be exposing?
Indeed, it's a lot to unpack, and it leads us straight to that enduring paradox of his legacy. How do we reconcile his really profound social commentary, his vulnerability, with some of these deeply personal actions and the image he cultivated? Think about Dear Mama.
Right.
It's just pure, raw love and respect. That track shows a completely different side, highlights his deep human connection, the unconditional love he found in his mother. It contrasts so powerfully with the thug life persona. It humanizes him completely, reminds us of the man beneath all the controversy. And he also showed this almost uncanny foresight sometimes, uttering phrases like "I can't breathe" decades before it became a national rallying cry. His consistent critique of economic inequality, how one person wins 36 million while others starve, how celebrities have millions while his community had nothing. That demonstrates a deeper mission, I think, beyond just conflict or personal vendettas. These were the systemic issues that truly seemed to weigh on him. They showcase the philosopher, the revolutionary in him, not just the man caught in struggles. Those moments of deep empathy and piercing critique, they can't just be dismissed because of the contradictions. They're integral to his complex message.
That's a compelling argument. Absolutely. And Dear Mama is undeniable. It's a testament to his capacity for love, for connection. It shows us a tender, introspective Tupac. But I have to press on the contradictions, the ones inherent in his life that the deep dive brings out so powerfully. How can a figure who, as you say, maybe saw himself as a kind of messiah and displayed such profound commentary also be convicted in a sex abuse case described by a judge as brutal violence, be involved in multiple shootings, and actively align himself with figures known for intimidation like Suge Knight? These personal actions and affiliations present a fundamental tension with that prophetic message. While he might have been a powerful truth teller for his community, these other aspects point to the inherent conflict within Tupac himself. It leaves open a critical question for us, one we have to grapple with. Whether his deeply troubled path, his personal struggles, at times undermined or compromised the very powerful, insightful, and potentially messianic message he sought to convey. The dichotomy is just stark, and it's a crucial part of the complex legacy we're left trying to understand.
So today, we've really engaged with that profound question posed by the deep dive about Tupac Shakur, Messiah or Menace. I've tried to focus on his revolutionary spirit, his artistic roots, the depth of his social commentary, and his attempts, perhaps, to channel rage into purpose, highlighting how his actions often stemmed from responding to a world he saw as a war zone.
And my perspective has centered more on how, despite those powerful intentions and insights, the very real consequences of his choices, the escalation of rivalries, the problematic aspects of his public image often seemed to veer into perpetuating the struggles he aimed to critique. And this, in turn, complicated how his profound social messages were received.
It seems clear that Tupac Shakur's life and legacy, as so vividly explored in the content from the deep dive, just resists any simple categorization. The material really forces us to grapple with that tension between his powerful insights and his deeply troubled path.
It reminds us of the enduring complexities that shape cultural icons.
And that's precisely why the content from the deep dive provides such fertile ground for this kind of examination. His story is a testament to the fact that rarely is any figure purely one thing or the other, especially when they operate under the intense pressures and contradictions of their time.
Absolutely. There is always more to explore in the rich tapestry of ideas and subjects brought to us by the deep dive, and we look forward to continuing these discussions.